In the winter of 1259, Polish peasants didn't bury Mongol corpses, they built market stalls around them. Selling hot soup beside frozen warriors still mounted on their horses, mothers held their children up to throw stones at the faces that once made emperors kneel. This wasn't war anymore. This was contempt. 20 years earlier, the mere whisper of Mongol hooves sent kingdoms fleeing. Now, dogs urinated on their armor. Something had broken inside Europe's soul, and what emerged was far more terrifying than anything the steppes had ever bred. The merchant's hands shook as he poured the ale. I saw one yesterday. His voice dropped to a whisper, still sitting on his horse, both frozen solid. The farmer beside him didn't look up from his cup. Which road? The Vistula crossing. There are dozens. Good. The farmer's fingers stopped moving. Let them watch what happens to wolves who thought we were sheep. The merchant blinked. You're not afraid. Afraid. The farmer finally looked at him. His eyes were empty. I was afraid in 1241. I'm not afraid anymore. Now I'm just waiting. Waiting for what? The farmer smiled. It wasn't a pleasant smile. For the next ones to come. That conversation happened in a tavern outside Krakow, recorded by a traveling clerk named Mikołaj. He wrote, "Something has changed in these people. They do not speak of the Mongols with terror anymore. They speak of them the way hunters speak of deer season, with anticipation." This wasn't normal. This wasn't how conquered people behaved. But then again, the Mongols had done something to Europe that no invader had ever done before they'd taught them that survival wasn't enough, 18 years earlier. April 9th, 1241, the field outside Legnica. How many are there? Duke Henry II, the pious, strained to see through the dust cloud. His standard-bearer, a young knight named Jarosław, tried to count. I see, maybe 3,004. Cavalry. All of them, my lord. Henry felt his stomach tighten. His own forces numbered nearly 25,000. Knights infantry crossbowmen from across Poland and Germany. Against 4,000 horse archers, this should have been a slaughter. Should have been. Formations, Henry shouted. Heavy cavalry front. We'll ride them down before... The Mongol drums began. Not war drums. Something else. A rhythm that made your teeth ache. Then they moved. Not toward the Polish lines. Away from them. Fast. Impossibly fast. They're retreating, someone shouted. Henry knew better. He'd heard the stories from Hungary, but his knights didn't. They saw enemies fleeing, and centuries of European warfare had taught them one thing: you chase fleeing enemies. No, Henry started. Too late. His right flank charged. 300 heavy cavalry, the finest knights in Christendom, thundering after the retreating Mongols. Jarosław grabbed the Duke's arm. My lord, shouldn't we... Watch, Henry said quietly. Just watch. The Mongols led them exactly 200 yards. Then they turned. Not to fight, to shoot. The arrows came in waves, precise, mechanical. The Mongol archers could reload while riding full gallop, shooting backwards, and every third arrow found a gap in the armor. Horses went down. Knights fell. And the ones who kept coming found themselves in a kill box. Mongol cavalry on 3 sides, shooting from angles the heavy armor couldn't protect. Jarosław watched the slaughter in silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. How do you fight that? Henry didn't answer. Because he didn't know. 20 minutes later, he was dead. A Mongol arrow threw his jaw up into his brain. They cut off his head, mounted it on a spear, and paraded it through the ruins of Legnica while the city burned. But that wasn't the worst part. A Polish survivor, a foot soldier named Tomasz, later testified to papal investigators. They didn't celebrate. They didn't drink or boast. They just counted. One officer stood over a pile with an abacus, clicking the beads as soldiers brought bags to him. I didn't understand at first. Then I saw what was in the bags. Ears. 9 sacks full. 25,000 ears cut from the dead sorted counted. They were filling out a report, Tomasz said, his voice still hollow years later. like a merchant counting grain. That's when I understood we weren't fighting an army. We were fighting an accounting system that happened to kill people. That was the Europe of 1241, a continent that discovered it was prey. But something was about to change. Because one man understood what fear does to people when you let it ferment long enough. Duke Bolesław V's chamber, Krakow, winter 1257. My lord, you should rest. Bolesław ignored his chamberlain. He was staring at maps spread across his bed, maps of Poland-Hungary, the paths the Mongols had taken 18 years ago. His finger traced the Vistula River again and again. Piotr. The old soldier stepped closer. My lord, tell me about your village. Piotr's face went rigid. My lord, I don't... Tell me. The silence stretched. Outside, snow fell. Finally, Piotr spoke, his voice flat, rehearsed the tone of a man who'd told this story to himself too many times. They came at dawn. My brother, he was hetman. He walked out with bread and salt. Piotr's hands clenched. Traditional hospitality, the old way. He was smiling when the arrow hit him. Where? Through his mouth. While he was speaking the greeting, it went through his tongue out the back of his skull. Piotr's voice never changed pitch, too controlled. My mother ran to him. They shot her in the legs, both legs, so she couldn't run. Then they... Go on. They made it slow, my lord. They made the whole village watch. 3 hours. When she finally died, they asked if anyone else wanted to negotiate. Bolesław closed his eyes. How many survived? 40 out of 300. And what did the 40 do after? We buried the dead, rebuilt, prayed for God's mercy. No. Bolesław's eyes opened. What did you want to do? Piotr stared at his duke. For 16 years he'd served this man. Never once had he been asked that question. I wanted... His voice cracked. I wanted to make them feel it. Everything they made us feel. The fear. The helplessness. He stopped. But we couldn't. They're the Horde. They're invincible. They're not. Bolesław pulled himself up, his hands shaking. Piotr, they're coming back. New reports. 30-40,000. They'll cross the Vistula by spring. My lord, we'll fortify the... We'll do nothing of the sort. Bolesław coughed. Blood flecked his lips. Because I'm dying, and I won't be here to watch us lose the same way again. He grabbed Piotr's wrist with surprising strength. So you're going to win for me, but not the way they expect. I don't understand. You can't beat the Mongols with courage, Piotr. Courage is what got Henry killed. You can't beat them with walls. They've torn down walls from Beijing to Baghdad. You can't beat them with honor because they don't have any. Piotr was barely breathing. Then how? You beat them with hunger. The word hung in the cold air. My lord, Bolesław leaned forward. The Mongols are the steppes made flesh. They need grass. They need grain. They need water. They need to feed 50,000 horses. Every conquest they've ever won. They did it by taking our resources and using them against us. His grip tightened. So we give them nothing. We make Poland worthless. We turn our own land into a weapon. You mean scorched earth? I mean something worse. Bolesław's voice dropped to a whisper. 3 months. 3 months before they cross the border. Every village within 50 miles evacuate and burn it. Every field salt it. Every well poison it. Make this land so dead that when they arrive they inherit only corpses and ash. Piotr's voice was hoarse. The people will never. The people will do it because they remember what happened to your brother, your mother, your village. Bolesław released his wrist. But that's not all, Piotr. That's not the part that will break them. What else? We poison their cavalry. The words didn't make sense at first. Piotr shook his head. You mean their horses? I mean we give them a gift. Bolesław's smile was terrible. Beautiful Polish mares, the kind they love to capture. We leave them in the fields looking abandoned. The Mongols will take them, they always do. But first, we infect them. With what? Glanders. Turns the lungs to soup. Spreads through a herd like plague through a crowded city. We give them horses that will kill every other horse they touch. Bolesław lay back exhausted. And we watch their strength eat itself from the inside. Piotr stood there frozen. My lord, that's evil. Bolesław's laugh was bitter. Dishonorable against the laws of war. He looked at the ceiling. Piotr, they shot your brother in the mouth for offering hospitality. They tortured your mother for hours because it sent a message. They counted our dead like grain harvests. His voice hardened. You don't beat demons by being saints. You beat them by becoming something they can't comprehend. Something that fights without rules, without mercy, without stopping. And if God judges us for this, then we'll burn in hell together, but at least our children won't. Bolesław closed his eyes. Now go. You have 3 months to turn Poland into a graveyard. Make it count. The orders went out in February 1259. Not to lords, not to bishops, to village elders. To mothers who'd buried their babies. To men who'd stood helpless while their world burned. In a village called Rimanów, the Duke's messenger, a monk named Benedict stood in the church and read the orders aloud. 60 people listened in silence. When he finished, a farmer named Wojciech stood up. You're asking us to destroy our own homes. Yes. To poison our own wells. Yes. To burn the fields we've worked our entire lives. Yes. Benedict's voice didn't rise. Because if you don't, the Mongols will. And then they'll take what's left and use it to kill the next village. And the next. Until there's nothing left of Poland but memories. An old woman in the back spoke up. And if we refuse... Benedict looked at her. He'd survived Legnica. He'd seen what happened to people who refused. Then your daughters will be entertainment for their officers. Your sons will pull their supply carts until they die, and your land will feed their horses while you starve. He paused. This way at least you choose the fire, and maybe, just maybe, you get to see them starve instead. The church was silent. Then Wojciech stood up again. When do we start? Tonight. That evening, Wojciech stood in his barn torch in hand. His wife and 3 children waited by the road with a single cart of belongings. Everything else, 20 years of work, of building, of hoping, was about to burn. His oldest son, 10 years old, asked, Papa, why? Wojciech didn't know how to explain it. How do you tell a child that sometimes you have to destroy everything to save anything? That the only way to win is to make sure nobody wins? He lit the torch. Because, hey, he said quietly, next time we burn theirs. The barn caught fast. The roof collapsed in a shower of sparks orange against the black winter sky. His wife took his hand. She didn't cry. She just squeezed once and said, Promise me we make them pay for this. I promise. Behind them, across the valley, other fires were starting. 60 villages burning themselves to save themselves. The smoke rose into the winter night like prayers written in ash. A Polish chronicler watching from a monastery wrote, It was as if the land itself had decided to die rather than submit. And in that death, something new was being born. Something patient. Something that knew how to wait. March 1259. The Vistula River crossing. Noy Khan sat on his horse watching his scouts return. He was a veteran of the Khwarezmian campaign. He'd ridden from Samarkand to Vienna. He knew conquest the way other men knew breathing. The scout approached, his face confused. Khan, the village is ahead. Empty. Yes, Khan, but not just empty, destroyed, burned, wells poisoned. Noy Khan nodded slowly. They fled. I don't think so, Khan. The scout hesitated. It looks deliberate, like they did it themselves. Show me. They rode to the nearest village. Noy Khan had seen abandoned settlements before. You could always tell when people fled in panic. Food left behind, doors open, signs of chaos. This was different. This was methodical. Every structure burned to the foundation. Every well filled with rotting animal carcasses. Fields scorched so thoroughly, even the soil looked dead. His second in command, a man named Batu, rode up beside him. What kind of enemy does this to their own land? Noi Khan didn't answer, because he didn't have one. In 20 years of conquest across 2 continents, he'd never seen anything like this. People defended their homes, or they fled. They didn't unmake them. Khan, we found something. Another scout approached, leading 3 beautiful mares. Polish horses. Looks like breeding stock, just wandering wild. Good quality. For the first time that day, Noi Khan smiled. At least the Poles had left something valuable. Take them. Add them to the herd. Yes, Khan. He should have wondered why anyone would abandon horses that valuable. He should have asked why they were just waiting there. But he'd been conquering for too long. Success makes you assume success. That night, he wrote a dispatch back to the Golden Horde. Polish territory acquired without resistance. No significant opposition encountered. Advance continues as planned. He was wrong about everything. 2 weeks later, Noi Khan was woken by shouting. He emerged from his tent to find his master of horse standing over a dead mare, his face pale. Khan, it's spreading. What's spreading? I don't know. Started with those Polish horses we captured. They coughed blood, then died. Now it's in the main herd. Noi Khan crouched beside the dead animal. Yellow discharge crusted its nostrils. The stench was incredible rot mixed with something sour wrong. How many? 20 so far. But Khan, the master's voice cracked. It's accelerating. By the end of March, 3,000 horses were dead. The Mongol advance, that legendary momentum that had crushed empires, stopped cold. And in the forests, the Poles began to hunt. A clearing west of Sandomierz. Night. Stanisław, a forester, looked at the 12 men gathered around him. No soldiers. A blacksmith. 2 farmers. A priest who'd lost his entire parish in 1241. A boy of 16 whose father had died at Legnica. Men with rough hands and quiet rage. They're camped along the river, Stanisław said. Maybe 800 horses left healthy. He drew in the dirt with a stick. We're not fighting them. We're killing their horses. At night. Silent. One throat, then we disappear. We're not heroes. We're exterminators. The priest spoke up. Is this murder? Stanisław looked at him. Is it murder to kill a wolf that's eating your flock? Wolves are animals. These are men. Are they? The blacksmith's voice was rough. My sister was 14 when they... He stopped. You tell me what they are, father. You tell me if things that do what they did qualify as men. The priest said nothing. Stanisław continued. We move in pairs. You cut your partner watches. Don't try to fight. Don't try to be brave. Just cut and run. Every horse we kill is one less raider. Every night we do this, they get weaker. He looked around the circle. Questions? The 16-year-old raised his hand. When do we start killing the riders? We don't. But we let them starve first. Stanisław's voice was cold. We let them watch their strength die piece by piece. We let them feel what it's like to be helpless. And when they're weak enough, when they're desperate enough, when they're finally broken enough, he smiled. Then we hunt them, like the animals they made us. The boy nodded slowly. My father would have liked you. Your father was at Legnica. Yes, I was 6. The boy's hand went to the knife at his belt. I remember him leaving. He told me he'd bring me back a Mongol helmet. His voice didn't change. They brought me back his ring. They cut off his hand to get it. Stanisław put a hand on his shoulder. Tonight, we start taking things back. They painted their faces with ash and moved through the darkness like smoke. The Mongol camp was restless horses dying every day, scouts reporting nothing but wasteland supplies running low. The sentries were tired, worried, looking inward at their dying herd instead of outward at the trees. Fatal mistake. 12 horses, 12 throats cut in perfect silence, then gone before the alarm was raised. When Noi Khan walked through the camp at dawn and saw the circle of dead horses, each with a single precise cut, he finally understood. We're not conquering anymore, he said quietly. Batu looked at him. Khan, we're being hunted. In the forest, Stanislav cleaned his blade. The priest beside him was shaking. I can't believe we just... Believe it, Stanislav said. Because we're doing it again tomorrow night, and the night after, and every night until there's nothing left for them to ride home on. How long can we keep this up? Stanislav looked toward the Mongol camp where smoke rose from funeral pyres for the dead horses. Longer than they can. Behind them, the boy was carving something into a tree. The priest walked over. What's that? The boy stepped back. Carved in the bark, still bleeding sap. Your turn to bleed. They came to teach us fear, but fear, if you let it rot long enough, becomes something else. Something patient. Something that waits in the dark with a sharpened blade and absolutely nothing left to lose. The Mongols were about to discover what happens when shepherds learn to hunt, and when the prey finally understands it has teeth. The screaming started 3 days later. Not from battle. From the horse lines. The Mongol camp erupted in chaos as handlers tried to control animals thrashing in their own blood, coughing up chunks of lung tissue that looked like wet cheese. Noi Khan stood in the center of it, watching his empire die one horse at a time. Burn them, he ordered. His master of horse stared at him. Khan, we can't just burn them now, before it spreads further. But it was already too late. The disease moved through the herd like fire through dry grass. By the time they started burning carcasses, 400 more were showing symptoms. The smoke from the pyres hung over the camp like a funeral shroud, black and greasy, smelling of rendered fat and failure. A young Mongol officer named Temur approached Noi Khan's tent that evening. He'd been with the Khan since the Khwarezmian campaign had seen him conquer cities, break armies, reduce kingdoms to ash. He'd never seen him like this, standing alone, staring at nothing. Khan, the men are asking. I know what they're asking. Noi Khan's voice was hollow. They want to know when we advance, when we take what we came for, when we start winning again. Yes, Khan. Tell them... Noi Khan paused. Tell them we're not winning anymore. We're just trying not to lose. Temur had never heard those words from his commander. Not once in 8 years. Khan, we still have numbers. We can we? Noi Khan finally looked at him. Fight who, Temur? Where is the enemy? Show me. Because all I see are corpses and empty villages and men dying in the night while we sleep. He gestured at the dying camp. We came here to conquer. Instead, we're being eaten alive by a land that refuses to submit. The Golden Horde has never retreated. The Golden Horde has never fought ghosts before. That night, Temur wrote in his personal journal a document that would be found centuries later in a Hungarian archive. The Khan is changing. He gives orders, but his eyes are elsewhere. He speaks of enemies we cannot see, battles we cannot win. The men feel it. Doubt spreads faster than the horse sickness. We came as conquerors. We are becoming prey. But Noi Khan wasn't changing. He was simply seeing clearly for the first time. And what he saw terrified him more than any army ever could. Because armies you could fight. Armies had formations, strategies, weaknesses. This was something else. This was a land that had learned to kill with silence. In the Polish forests, Stanislav was teaching the next group of hunters. 20 men this time. Word had spread through the refugee camps. If you wanted revenge, if you wanted to make them hurt, you found the forester with ash on his face and murder in his eyes. Listen carefully. Stanislav crouched in the clearing, speaking barely above a whisper. You're not soldiers. Don't try to be. Soldiers fight fair. Soldiers have honor. Soldiers die. He looked around the circle. You're hunters, and what you're hunting doesn't deserve honor. A new recruit, a young man named Kazimierz, whose village had been burned in the first invasion, raised his hand. How many have you killed so far? Horses or men? Men. None. Stanisław's answer caught everyone off guard. We haven't killed a single rider yet. But I thought, think about it. Stanisław's voice was patient, almost gentle. What's worse for a Mongol, a quick death in battle, or watching his horse die slowly, knowing he's stuck in a dead land with no food, no water, no way home? He smiled. We're not giving them the mercy of combat. We're giving them despair. An older hunter named Bogdan spoke up. When do we give them death? When they're weak enough to appreciate it. Stanisław stood. The Mongols taught Europe how to suffer. Now we're teaching them the same lesson, slowly, carefully, until they understand what they've created. Kazimierz looked uncomfortable. My priest says revenge is a sin. Your priest is right. Stanisław handed him a knife. But your priest wasn't there when they nailed his predecessor to the church door and set it on fire. I was. So you have to decide, do you want to be sinless, or do you want them gone? The young man took the knife. That's what I thought. That night they expanded operations. 3 teams, 30 horses. And this time they left something behind, a message carved into the leather of the saddles they'd slashed. You taught us well. When Neukan saw it the next morning, he knew. This wasn't random. This wasn't chaos. This was deliberate, systematic, personal. Someone was orchestrating this. Someone who understood psychological warfare better than he did. Find them, he ordered Timur. Khan, they only move at night. They leave no tracks. The forest is... I don't care if they're invisible. Find them, or we're all going to die in this cursed country. Timur assembled a hunting party. 50 men, the best trackers in the horde. They moved into the forest at dawn, following the vague direction the night raiders seemed to come from. They never came back. Stanisław and his hunters found them 3 days later, wandering in circles, half-starved, 2 men short. The Poles had led them deeper into the marshlands, split them up using horn calls that sounded like Mongol signals, then simply disappeared. The 2 missing men had fallen through ice into bog water. Their bodies would never be found. The remaining 48 staggered back to camp, broken, humiliated, terrified. One of them, a veteran tracker named Joki, reported directly to Neukan. Khan, the forest, it's not natural. The paths change. The landmarks move. We'd mark a tree, come back an hour later, and it would be gone. Replaced. Like the forest itself was fighting us. Forests don't fight. This one does. Joki's hands were shaking. We heard them, Khan, in the trees, laughing, whispering to each other in their language. But every time we turned, nothing. Just trees and shadows and... He stopped. Sir, I've tracked across the steppes. I've hunted in the Caucasus Mountains. I've never been afraid of forest before. But this place... He looked at his Khan with desperate eyes. This place wants us dead. The land itself hates us. Neukan dismissed him and sat alone in his tent. He pulled out a map, the same maps that had guided the horde across Asia through Russia into Europe. Maps that showed rivers, mountains, cities, resources. But they didn't show this. They didn't show land that fought back. They didn't show forests that swallowed hunting parties. They didn't show wells that killed fields that yielded nothing but ash, and an enemy that struck from darkness and disappeared like smoke. He thought about the campaign in Khwarazm. That had been brutal cities, burned populations, massacred rivers, diverted to destroy farmland. The Mongols had invented scorched earth warfare. They'd perfected it. Now someone was using it against them, and doing it better. We taught them too well, he whispered to no one. Outside, another horse collapsed, foam pouring from its mouth. The sound of its death throes echoed through the camp. Nobody even reacted anymore. Death had become background noise. Back in the forest, Stanisław was having a different conversation. The priest who'd joined the hunters, Father Wojciech, cornered him by the stream where they were washing blood from their clothes. We need to talk about what we're becoming. Stanisław didn't look up. We're becoming survivors. We're becoming them. The priest's voice was urgent. Every night we go out there and we hurt them. We terrify them. We make them suffer. How is that different from what they did to us? Intent. Stanislav finally met his eyes. They came to conquer. We're here to defend. They started this. We're finishing it. By becoming monsters. If that's what it takes. Stanislav wrung out his shirt, pink water dripping into the stream. You know what the difference is between us and them, Father? When this is over, when they're gone, we'll go back to farming. We'll put down the knives and pick up plows. We'll become human again. He hung the shirt on a branch. They can't. This is what they are. This is all they are. We're just borrowing their cruelty long enough to survive it. And if we can't stop, if we like it. Stanislav was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost sad. Then they really did conquer us, just not the way they planned. Father Wojciech nodded slowly. I'm afraid of that. I'm afraid we're killing our souls to save our bodies. Maybe. Stanislav looked toward the Mongol camp, visible through the trees as a haze of smoke and despair. But father souls grow back, the dead don't. That philosophical divide ran through the entire Polish resistance. In the refugee camps west of the fighting families debated what their men were doing in the forests. Some called them heroes. Others called them murderers who'd burn in hell beside their enemies. In the town of Tarnów, a woman named Agnieszka stood in the market square shouting at anyone who'd listen. My husband is out there killing in the night. When he comes home, if he comes home, what will he be? What will I tell our children? That their father became the thing he hated. An old woman grandmother to 3 children orphaned in 1241 responded quietly. You'll tell them he did what had to be done, and you'll thank God he was strong enough to do it. At what cost? At any cost. The old woman's voice hardened. Because the alternative is we all die like my daughter died, like my son-in-law died, like whole villages died screaming for mercy that never came. She stepped closer to Agnieszka. Your husband is buying you time to ask moral questions. Don't waste it by judging him. But Agnieszka wasn't alone in her doubts. Across Poland, in churches and homes, people wrestled with what their resistance had become. Were they defenders? Or had they crossed some line that couldn't be uncrossed? The Bishop of Krakow, in a sermon that would later be banned by Rome, said, "We stand at a precipice. On one side is death with our principles intact. On the other is survival with our souls in question. I cannot tell you which to choose. I can only tell you that God sees both the deed and the desperation that drives it. And in his infinite wisdom, he will judge us not by our actions, but by what was in our hearts when we took them." It was the most honest thing a church official had said in decades. It was also the most terrifying, because it meant there were no easy answers, no clear right and wrong, just survival and the price you paid for it. In the Mongol camp, a different kind of moral crisis was brewing. The soldiers, proud warriors of the greatest empire the world had ever seen, were starting to break down. Not from combat, from helplessness. Tamer found one of his men, a young rider named Guyuk, sitting outside his tent, staring at nothing. Guyuk, report for duty. No response. Guyuk. The young man's head turned slowly. His eyes were empty. Why? Because I gave you an order. No, why are we here? Guyuk's voice was flat. We came to conquer, but there's nothing to conquer. Just dead land and dying horses and enemies we can't see. We're not warriors anymore. We're just waiting to die slowly. Timur crouched beside him. We're Mongols. We don't give up. We're not Mongols anymore. Guyuk looked at him. We're corpses that haven't stopped moving yet. That phrase, corpses that haven't stopped moving, spread through the camp like the horse sickness. Men stopped maintaining their equipment, stopped training, stopped caring. The psychological collapse was as devastating as any military defeat. Noy Khan called a council of his senior officers. 12 men veterans of campaigns across 2 continents gathered in his tent. He looked at each of them in turn. Tell me the truth. Can we win this? Silence. Finally, Batu spoke. Win what, Khan? There's nothing to win. No city to take. No army to break. No resources to claim. We're fighting a void. Then what do you recommend for retreat? The word hung in the air like a blasphemy. Batu pushed forward anyway. Khan, every day we stay here, we get weaker. The horses are dying. The men are breaking. And the enemy, whoever they are, they're getting bolder. Last night they came within 50 yards of your tent. 50 yards. They could have, but they didn't. Noi Khan's voice was cold. They killed 15 more horses instead. You know why? Because they're not trying to kill us quickly. They're trying to break us, to make us feel what they felt. He looked around the tent, and it's working. Another officer, older scarred from a dozen battles, leaned forward. Khan, in the Caucasus campaign, we faced mountain tribes that used similar tactics. We responded with overwhelming force, total annihilation of every village, every person, everything that could support resistance. There are no villages left to destroy. Noi Khan's laugh was bitter. They destroyed them themselves. They took away our ability to retaliate because there's nothing left to retaliate against. He slammed his fist on the table. Don't you see? We've been fighting kingdoms and armies our entire lives. We know how to break those. But this is something new. This is an enemy that wins by having nothing left to lose. The tent fell silent, because they all knew he was right. The Mongol way of war, the terror, the scorched earth, the systematic destruction had been turned against them by people who'd learned the lesson too well. So, what do we do? Tamer's voice was quiet. Noi Khan looked at the map one more time. Then he made the hardest decision of his military career. We do what no Mongol force has ever done. We adapt, or we die. What does that mean? It means we stop trying to conquer. We start trying to survive. He pointed at the map. The mountains, the Carpathians. We move the entire force there. Defensive position. Wait out the winter. Rebuild our strength. Khan, the Golden Horde doesn't retreat to... The Golden Horde doesn't have a choice. Noi Khan's voice cut like a blade. We're outnumbered by an enemy we can't see, outmaneuvered in terrain we don't understand, and outthought by people we underestimated. Pride is a luxury. Right now, survival is the only victory we can hope for. He gave the order that night. The entire force, what was left of it, would march to the Carpathian Mountains. 3,000 men, 400 horses, and the growing certainty that they'd just lost a war without ever really fighting it. As the Mongols broke camp and began their retreat, Stanislav watched from the hills. Beside him, Kazimierz couldn't believe it. They're leaving. No. Stanislav's voice was grim. They're running. There's a difference. Isn't that what we wanted? It's exactly what we wanted. Stanislav stood. And now comes the hard part. What hard part? We won. Stanislav looked at the young man, seeing the excitement, the naive hope that victory meant the end. Kazimierz, we didn't win. We just survived the first round. Now we have to make sure they never come back. And that means following them into those mountains and making sure that when winter comes, they have nothing left. No food, no shelter, no hope. You mean we keep killing them? I mean, we finish what they started. Stanislav's hand went to his knife. Because if we stop now, if we let them live, they'll heal. They'll rebuild. And in 5 years or 10, they'll come back. And next time, they'll know our tricks. He started walking toward the camp. So we don't stop. We don't show mercy. We become their nightmare until they're too broken to ever dream of conquest again. Father Wojciech, who'd been listening, spoke up. And what will that make us? Stanislav didn't turn around. Survivors, Father, just survivors. But his voice cracked on the last word. Because he knew they all knew that survival was going to cost them something precious. Something that once lost might never be recovered. Their humanity. The Mongols marched toward the mountains, not knowing they were walking into something worse than any battlefield. Not knowing that the Poles had already been there, salting the caves, poisoning the streams, setting traps in every viable shelter. Not knowing that the land itself had learned to hate them. And in that hatred, in that systematic, patient, methodical hatred, lay something far more terrifying than the Mongol war machine had ever been. because the Mongols killed quickly. The Poles had learned to kill slowly, to make it hurt, to make it last. They'd become what they needed to become. And God helped them all for it. The first Mongol died on the mountain trail 3 days into the retreat, not from a blade, from hunger. His name was Ogedei, and he'd ridden with the horde since the invasion of Kievan Rus. 17 years of conquest. 17 years of never knowing what it felt like to be weak. His companions found him face down in the snow, one hand still reaching toward his saddlebag. Empty. Everything was empty. Timur stood over the body. Strip him. Khan's orders are to bury... Strip him. Take the clothes, the boots, anything useful. Timur's voice was mechanical. He doesn't need them anymore. The young soldier Guyuk stared at him. Sir, he was my uncle. Then he'd want you to survive. Timur walked away. Strip him or leave him. But we're moving in 5 minutes. That was how it started. The slow dissolution of everything that made the Mongol war machine function. Discipline, honor, brotherhood. When men get hungry enough, when the cold seeps deep enough, those things become luxuries you can't afford. Noi Khan knew it. He watched his army fracture one frozen corpse at a time, and there was nothing he could do except keep moving forward. Or rather backward. Because that's what this was, a retreat disguised as a strategic repositioning. Khan, the men are eating leather. Batu delivered the report without emotion. They were 2 weeks into the mountain crossing, and reality had become something none of them wanted to acknowledge. What kind of leather? Noi Khan asked, though he already knew. Saddles, belts, bootstraps, anything they can boil soft enough to chew. And the horses? 300 left. The men are... Batu paused. Some are looking at them differently now. Noi Khan closed his eyes. He knew that look. He'd seen it in besieged cities, in trapped armies, in men who'd crossed the line from soldier to survivor. Post guards on the horse lines. Anyone caught killing a horse for meat gets executed. Khan, with respect, we might need to... No. The word was final. The moment we start eating our horses is the moment we admit we're never leaving this cursed land. Those animals are the only things standing between us and becoming permanent residents of a Polish graveyard. Batu nodded and left. But Noi Khan knew the order wouldn't hold. Hunger has a way of overriding even the most severe threats. You can't execute a starving man for wanting to live. And the Poles knew it too. Stanisław's hunters had followed the Mongol retreat into the mountains, staying just far enough back to remain invisible, close enough to make their presence felt. Every night they'd creep into the edges of the Mongol camp and take things. Not weapons, not valuables. Food. 3 loaves of bread, a bag of dried meat, a pot of grain. Never enough to be catastrophic. Just enough to be noticed. Just enough to make the Mongols understand that even their supplies weren't safe. It's brilliant and it's evil, Father Wojciech said one night as they watched the Mongol camp from a ridge. We're not killing them. We're making them kill themselves. Stanisław didn't respond. He was watching a group of Mongol soldiers arguing over a bag of something, grain maybe, or dried fruit. The argument escalated. Hands went to knives. Officers broke it up before blood was spilled, but barely. They're cracking, Kazimierz observed. Another week of this, and they'll be at each other's throats. Good. Stanisław stood. Tonight, we take their salt. Salt? Why salt? Because without it, they can't preserve any meat they do manage to find. Without it, any wounds they get will fester faster. Without it, Stanisław smiled, and it was not a kind smile. Without it, they'll start craving it so badly, they'll drink seawater and make themselves sicker. Salt is survival in winter mountains, and we're taking away their ability to survive. The raid went perfectly. 6 men in and out in under 10 minutes, carrying away 3 bags of precious salt. The Mongols didn't even notice until morning. When they did, Noi Khan's roar could be heard across the entire camp. Find them! His officers stood silent. Because they'd tried. They'd sent scouts trackers hunting parties. None of it worked. The Poles were ghosts. Worse than ghosts, they were the land itself, shifting and striking and disappearing like wind through trees. Timur finally spoke. Khan, we need to talk about Sandomirs. What about it? It's 3 days south, walled city, storage facilities. We could... No. Noi Khan knew where this was going. We're not strong enough to lay siege to a fortified position. We don't need to siege it, Khan. We just need to threaten it. Make them negotiate, trade for supplies. They won't negotiate with us. Haven't you learned that yet? These people would rather burn their own cities than let us have them. Then we take it by force. Noi Khan looked at his second-in-command, really looked at him. Timur's eyes were hollow, his face gaunt, his hands shaking slightly from malnutrition. This wasn't strategy talking. This was desperation. With what force, Timur? We have 3,000 starving men and 300 dying horses. What exactly are we taking anything with? We're still Mongols. Are we? The question hung in the cold air. Because I look around and I see men who eat leather and kill each other over grain and jump at shadows in the forest. That's not the horde. That's just survivors. But Timur was beyond reason, beyond logic. He was a drowning man grasping at anything that might float. Khan, if we don't do something, we're all going to die in these mountains. At least this way, we die fighting. No. Noi Khan's voice was firm. We die fighting when there's something worth dying for. Not because we're too proud to admit we've already lost. That conversation, recorded in Timur's journal and later found by Hungarian monks, reveals something historians often miss about the Mongol retreat. It wasn't just a military withdrawal, it was an identity crisis. These men had spent their entire lives as conquerors. Being reduced to refugees broke something fundamental in their psyche. But Timur didn't listen. That night, he took 300 men and rode towards Sandomirs without orders, a mutiny disguised as initiative. When Noi Khan discovered it at dawn, he knew. This was the end. Not because Timur would fail, though he would, but because the army had stopped being an army. It had become a collection of desperate individuals making desperate choices. Should we stop them? Batu asked. Noi Khan shook his head. Let them go. Maybe they'll succeed. Maybe they'll find food and glory in everything they're looking for. He didn't sound convinced. Or maybe they'll just die faster than the rest of us. Either way, it's out of my hands now. Timur's 300 reached Sandomirs the next evening. The city sat on a hill walls, thick gates closed. It looked formidable. It looked like every other city the Mongols had taken in their decades of conquest. It was a trap. Bolesław's final orders, the ones he'd given before dying, had included detailed instructions for Sandomirs. Make it look defendable, he'd written. Make them think there's something worth taking, then show them what desperation really looks like. The city garrison commander, a veteran named Krzysztof, watched the Mongols approach. He counted them. 300, maybe. On horses that looked like they could barely stand. Men who moved with the sluggish uncertainty of the starving. They're not here to conquer, he said to his lieutenant. They're here to eat. Should we negotiate? No. Krzysztof smiled. We should educate. He opened the gates. Actually opened them. The Mongols, expecting resistance, found instead an invitation. Timur, seeing those open gates, should have been suspicious, should have recognized the trap. But he was too hungry, too desperate, too far gone to think straight. Forward, he shouted. The city surrenders. His men cheered thin, weak cheers from parched throats, but cheers nonetheless. They rode through the gates expecting submission. They found something else entirely. The gates slammed shut behind them. Not with soldiers manning them with mechanisms, heavy counterweights that had been modified over weeks. The 300 Mongols were now trapped in a killing ground. But still no arrows came. No defenders appeared, just silence. Timur looked around confused. Where are they? Then the ground gave way. Not everywhere, just in specific spots. Spots that had been weakened, covered with thin boards and snow. Horses fell through legs, shattering on hidden stakes below. Riders tumbled, breaking bones on impact. Screams filled the city square as dozens of Mongols found themselves in pits designed specifically for this moment. And then the real killing started, but not with soldiers, with civilians, farmers with pitchforks, blacksmiths with hammers, women with kitchen knives, old men with hunting spears. The people of Sandomierz poured out of buildings not as an army, but as a mob, and mobs fueled by 18 years of rage and fear are far more terrifying than any organized military. They didn't fight with technique. They fought with fury. A baker named Marek, whose wife had been taken in 1241, brought a meat cleaver down on a fallen Mongol's neck. Again, and again, and again until his arms were too tired to lift it anymore. A teenage girl whose parents had died at Legnica stabbed a Mongol officer in the throat with a sewing needle. It wasn't a killing blow, not immediately, but she kept stabbing. Face, eyes, neck, everywhere she could reach, making small puncture wounds that bled and bled and bled. This wasn't warfare. This was butchery, and it was precisely what Bolesław had planned. Tamur, trapped in the center of it, finally understood. This wasn't a city, it was an abattoir, and he was the livestock. He fought his way toward the gates, killing 3 civilians in the process. But for every one he killed, 5 more appeared. An old woman grabbed his leg, trying to pull him from his horse. He kicked her away. A boy couldn't have been more than 12, threw a stone that caught him in the temple, stunning him. When he fell from his horse, the crowd swarmed him. He died slowly, painfully torn apart by hands that had once sewn clothes and kneaded bread and held children. Of the 300 Mongols who entered Sandomierz, 17 made it back out. They rode through the reopened gates in full retreat, bleeding, broken, traumatized. Behind them, the city gates closed again. Peaceful, quiet, as if nothing had happened. Inside, the Polish citizens walked among the corpses, taking ears. Not as trophies. As payment. The city council had offered a bounty, 1 silver coin per Mongol ear. By dawn, the city treasury was significantly lighter. A Hungarian chronicler who visited Sandomierz weeks later wrote, "I saw the pile of ears in the church. They had preserved them in salt and displayed them as proof of their victory. The priest called it the harvest of justice. I called it proof that humans, when pushed far enough, become capable of anything. The line between civilization and savagery is thinner than we'd like to believe." These people had crossed it and felt no shame, only satisfaction. When the 17 survivors reached Noikhan's camp, their report broke whatever was left of Mongol morale. Soldiers openly wept. Officers argued about retreat routes. Men who'd fought across continents spoke of surrender, a word that didn't even exist in Mongolian military vocabulary until that moment. Noikhan listened to the survivors' testimony in silence. When they finished, he asked only one question. "Did any of you see their army?" "No, Khan. Just people. Townspeople. Not soldiers. Some might have been, but most were just citizens. Old men, women, children." Noikhan nodded slowly. "Do you understand what that means?" Silence. "It means we're not fighting an army. We're fighting everyone. Every person in this cursed country has become our enemy. Every grandmother, every child, every priest and farmer and merchant. They've all decided that killing us is more important than their own laws, their own morality, their own God." He stood. "We came here to conquer a kingdom. Instead, we've created a nation of killers united by one purpose, our destruction." That night, Noikhan made the decision. We retreat, fully, completely, back across the Vistula, out of Poland, and we never come back. An older officer, one who'd been with Genghis Khan himself, spoke up. "Khan, the Golden Horde has never faced this." Noikhan's voice was sharp. "We've conquered empires. We've destroyed kingdoms. We've made nations kneel. But this is different. These people don't kneel. They don't surrender. They just kill and die and kill again until either we're gone or they're extinct. And I'll be damned if I let the Horde be remembered as the army that was bled to death by farmers." But the retreat was already too late for many. The winter was setting in hard. The remaining horses were dying at a rate of 10 per day. And the hunters, Stanisław's ghosts, were getting bolder. They'd started leaving bodies now. Mongol sentries found dead throats cut, positioned in ways that sent messages. One was left sitting upright against a tree, his hands arranged like he was praying. Around him, arranged in a circle, were the skulls of Mongol soldiers from previous raids. The message was clear: your prayers won't save you here. Another was found hanging from a branch, gutted like a deer, his entrails feeding crows, carved into his chest. This is our land now. The psychological warfare was working. Mongol soldiers refused to stand guard alone. Some refused to sleep. Others began deserting, running into the forest, preferring to take their chances with the wilderness than stay with an army that felt like it was already dead. Guyuk, the young soldier who'd lost his uncle, approached Stanisław's camp one night with his hands raised. He was alone, weaponless, clearly terrified. "I surrender," he said in broken Polish. Kazimierz raised his bow. "No prisoners." But Stanisław stopped him. "Wait." He approached the young Mongol, studying him. "Why?" "Because I want to live." Guyuk's voice cracked. "Please, I don't want to die in these mountains. I just want to go home." "You should have thought of that before you came here." "I didn't choose this. I was conscripted. I was 16. Tears were streaming down his face now. "I've killed no one. I've harmed no one. I just want to live." Stanisław stood there looking at this boy because that's what he was. Just a boy, and felt something he hadn't felt in months. Doubt. Father Wojciech stepped forward. "Stanisław, if we kill him, we become them," Stanisław finished. "I know." He looked at Guyuk. "Can you find your way to the border?" I think so." "Then go. Walk west. Don't stop. Don't look back. And if you ever see another Mongol planning to invade Poland, you tell them what you saw here. You tell them what we've become. You make sure they understand that this land eats invaders." Guyuk nodded frantically. "Thank you. Thank you." "Don't thank me." Stanisław's voice was cold. "Thank God I'm not as far gone as I thought I was. Now run before I change my mind." The boy ran, disappeared into the darkness. Kazimierz was furious. "You let him go, after everything they've done." "I let one boy go." Stanisław's voice was tired. One boy who might actually learn something from this, who might go back and tell stories that prevent the next invasion. That's worth more than his death. Or he'll go back and tell them we're weak. Let him. Stanisław started walking back to camp. Let him tell them we're so strong we can afford mercy. Let him tell them we beat the Mongols so badly we could choose who lives and who dies. Let him tell them whatever he wants. He stopped, turned back. Because we won, Kazimierz, and winners get to choose what kind of monsters they want to be. But even as he said it, Stanisław knew something had changed. Some line had been crossed that couldn't be uncrossed. They'd set out to defend their homes. Somewhere along the way they'd become something else, something darker, something that would outlast this war and haunt them for the rest of their lives. In the Mongol camp, Noi Khan received word that one of his men had deserted. He didn't even bother investigating. What was one more lost soldier in an army that was already gone? He looked at the map one final time, then threw it in the fire. Maps were for people who knew where they were going. The Golden Horde was just trying to leave. And as the winter deepened, as the cold settled into bones and the hunger became constant companion, a single truth emerged. The Mongols had come to teach Europe about conquest. Instead, Europe had taught them about defeat. And unlike conquest, which they'd mastered, defeat was a lesson they'd never learned. It was killing them faster than any sword ever could. The cannibalism started on the 43rd day. Nobody talked about it at first. You'd just notice that someone was missing from morning formation and nobody asked questions. Then you'd see men with grease on their lips despite the fact that no one had cooked anything in days. Batu was the first officer to confront it directly. He found two soldiers crouched behind a snowbank gnawing on something that was definitely not horse meat. The bones were too small, too human. "Where did you get that?" The soldiers looked up, faces hollow, eyes dead. One of them spoke through a mouthful. "He died last night. Natural causes." "And you're eating him?" He's not using it anymore. The soldier's voice held no shame, no guilt. Just pragmatic hunger. You want some, Batu should have executed them. That's what regulations demanded. That's what honor required. Instead, he walked away. Because deep down he knew that in another week, maybe less, he'd be making the same choice. Survival has a way of reducing all your principles to a single question. Do I want to live, or do I want to be right? When he reported it to Noi Khan, the commander's response was silence. Long, terrible silence. Then, just tell them to be discreet. Khan, we can't just... What would you have me do? Batu, execute them. Then what, execute the next ones? And the ones after that? Noi Khan's voice was empty. We're not an army anymore. We're just animals trying to survive. So tell them to be discreet, and pray we get out of these mountains before there's nobody left to eat. A Franciscan monk named Brother Giacomo, who was traveling through Hungary collecting testimonies about the Mongol invasions, later recorded an interview with a survivor of this retreat. The man, whose name was withheld, spoke with the flat affect of someone describing a nightmare he couldn't quite believe was real. We ate Timur on the 43rd day. He'd been my friend since we were boys in the steppes. We grew up together, trained together, conquered together. When he died from the cold, The survivor paused. We told ourselves it was practical, that he wouldn't have wanted his body to go to waste, that we were honoring him by using everything. But we weren't honoring him. We were just hungry. And hunger makes philosophers out of monsters. Brother Giacomo asked, "Did you ask forgiveness?" The survivor laughed, a sound devoid of humor. Forgiveness, from who God wasn't in those mountains. Only hunger was. And hunger doesn't forgive. It just demands. That testimony, preserved in the Vatican archives under accounts of moral degradation during the Polish campaign 1259, reveals something crucial that military histories often gloss over. The Mongols didn't just lose a battle, they lost themselves. They crossed lines that can't be uncrossed, and every survivor carried that weight for the rest of their lives. But while the Mongols were eating their own dead, the Poles were making sure that's all they'd have to eat. Stanisław's hunters had moved into the mountains ahead of the retreat, systematically destroying every possible source of food. They found a cave system the Mongols might use for shelter, collapsed the entrances. They found a valley with edible plants, burned it to ash. They found a stream with fish, poisoned it upstream. It's thorough, Kazimierz observed, watching Stanisław pour a bag of lime into a mountain spring. Maybe too thorough. No such thing. Stanisław sealed the bag and moved to the next stream. Every berry they eat is one more day they survive. Every fish they catch is one more mile they can march. We're not just fighting them, we're fighting their hope. And hope dies when you're surrounded by nothing but death. Father Wojciech, who'd grown quieter with each passing week, finally spoke. Do you ever think about what we're doing? Really think about it. Every night. And I think about my village. I think about Piotr's mother tortured for 3 hours while we all watched. I think about the 9 sacks of ears at Legnica. I think about 18 years of nightmares. Stanisław poured more lime into the water, watching it turn cloudy and toxic. And then I sleep just fine. But he wasn't sleeping fine. None of them were. Kazimierz had started talking in his sleep, mumbling apologies to people who weren't there. The blacksmith Bogdan had stopped speaking altogether, just followed orders with mechanical precision, his eyes focused on something far away. Even the youngest hunter, the 16-year-old boy whose father had died at Legnica, had developed a twitch. His hands shook constantly now, even when he was doing nothing. They were winning. But winning was costing them something that couldn't be measured in casualties or territory. In the Mongol camp, desperation had evolved into something darker. Noi Khan discovered it when one of his officers approached him with a proposal that made his blood run cold. Khan, we need to discuss alternatives. What alternatives? Noi Khan was too tired for games. The Polish hunters. They follow us. They sabotage us, but they're just men. Mortal men. If we could capture one, and we could negotiate, trade him for safe passage, or... The officer paused. Or we could make an example. Something so terrible that it stops them. Noi Khan looked at this man, someone he'd trusted for years, and saw someone he didn't recognize. You want to torture prisoners? Is that what we've become? Khan, they're torturing us right now, slowly. Psychologically, at least our way would be honest. Our way, Noikhan's voice rose. We don't have a way anymore. We have survival and desperation and a rapidly approaching end. He grabbed the officer by his armor. Listen to me. We are not torturing prisoners. We are not negotiating. We are getting out of these mountains as fast as possible, and we're doing it without becoming the monsters they already think we are. With respect, Khan, they already think we're monsters. Maybe it's time we acted like it. Noi Khan released him. Get out. Khan, get out before I execute you for even suggesting it. The officer left, but Noi Khan knew the idea was already spreading. Desperate men have desperate thoughts, and once those thoughts take root, they grow like cancer. That night, he sat alone in his tent, looking at something he'd carried for 20 years. A small carved horse given to him by his father before his first campaign. His father had said, "Remember who you are, not just what you do. We conquer, yes, but we remain Mongols. We remain men." Noi Khan turned the carving over in his hands. "I'm sorry, Father," he whispered to the darkness. "I don't think we're men anymore. I don't know what we are." The next morning brought fresh horror. A Mongol scouting party went missing. 20 men sent to find a path through the mountains. They didn't return by nightfall, or the next day, or the day after that. On the fourth day, Temur was dead at Sandomir's. Batu found them, sort of. They were arranged in a clearing like a warning. 20 bodies, stripped naked, positioned in a circle. Each one had been killed differently, throats cut, stabbed, bludgeoned, strangled. And in the center of the circle, built from their bones, was a structure, a house. A small, carefully constructed house made entirely from human remains, carved into the snow around it in letters 6 feet tall, "Go home." Batu vomited. Even after everything he'd seen, everything he'd done, this broke something in him. Because this wasn't rage. This wasn't revenge. This was art. Someone had taken the time to create this, to position each body with care, to build that grotesque structure with precision. This was hatred refined into craftsmanship. He returned to camp and reported directly to Noi Khan. "They're not human, Khan. Whatever they've become, they're not human anymore." "Neither are we." Noi Khan's response was automatic. Then he paused. "Show me." "Khan, you don't want to..." "Show me." They rode out together. When Noi Khan saw the display, he didn't vomit. He didn't rage. He just stood there looking at it and felt something inside him finally break. Whatever rope had been holding his sanity together, it frayed and snapped. "We did this," he said quietly. "Khan. We taught them this. Every village we burned, every person we killed, every act of calculated terror, we were the teachers, they were the students." He gestured at the bone house. "And now they've graduated. What do? We run." Noi Khan turned away. "We run until we can't run anymore, and then we crawl. And if we make it out of Poland alive, we never come back. Because this land doesn't forgive. It just remembers. And it will remember us forever." But Stanislav wasn't in the clearing when Noi Khan arrived. He was 2 miles away, sitting against a tree, crying. Kazimierz found him like that, the man who'd led them through months of systematic vengeance, who'd planned every raid and every poisoning, who'd seemed made of stone, weeping like a child. "Stanislav. I couldn't stop them." His voice was hoarse. "The bone house. I tried to stop them. I said it was too far, but they wouldn't listen. They said..." He wiped his face. "They said we needed to send a message, that we needed to make the Mongols understand what fear really means. Isn't that what we've been doing all along? No. We've been defending ourselves, fighting back. But this..." Stanislav looked at his hands. "This is something else. This is becoming them. And I can't..." His voice broke. "I can't be what we're becoming." Kazimierz sat down beside him. For a long time, neither spoke. Then the young man said, My father told me once that war doesn't change who you are. It reveals who you are. All your life you think you're a good person. Then war comes, and you discover what you're really made of. And what are we made of? I don't know, but I know we're still alive. And everyone we loved who died, they're not. So maybe being alive means being willing to do terrible things. Maybe survival costs your soul. Kazimierz picked up a handful of snow, watching it melt in his palm. Or maybe we were always capable of this, and we just needed permission to let it out. That philosophical conversation, overheard and later recorded by another hunter who was hiding nearby, captures the moral paralysis that gripped both sides by this point in the conflict. Nobody was right anymore. Nobody was wrong. They were all just trapped in a cycle of violence that had long since stopped being about anything noble. 3 days later, the Mongols found another display. This one was simpler. A single body, one of their officers crucified to a tree with his own arrows. Around his neck hung a sign written in Mongolian, "Your gods cannot save you here." But underneath, in smaller letters that only someone close would see, was another message: "Please leave. We're tired of killing." That second message, that small admission of exhaustion, never made it into the official reports. The Mongol who cut down the body saw it, read it, and then burned the sign before anyone else could. Because that message was more terrifying than any threat. It meant the enemy was just as broken as they were, and they were still winning. The retreat accelerated after that. Noikon pushed the pace to brutal levels 20 miles a day through mountain terrain in winter with dying horses and starving men. Soldiers dropped from exhaustion and were left behind. Not because Noikon was cruel, but because stopping meant dying. Moving meant maybe surviving. Out of 3,000 men who'd entered Poland, barely 1,200 were still alive. Out of 50,000 horses that had started the campaign, fewer than 100 remained. The Golden Horde, that unstoppable force that had crushed empires, was now just a trickle of broken men fleeing from their own legend. On the 60th day, they reached the Vistula River, the border, safety, home. Batu stood at the riverbank looking back at Poland. We made it. Did we? Noikon's voice was hollow. Look at us, Batu. Really look. We're corpses that happen to still be breathing. We'll carry this land with us for the rest of our lives. Every night we'll smell that rot. Every dream we'll see those faces. We didn't escape Poland. Poland is inside us now, and it always will be. They crossed the river in silence. On the far bank, garrison troops waited, fresh soldiers who'd heard tales of the great campaign, expecting to see heroes return. Instead, they saw ghosts. A Russian chronicler observing the retreat from a monastery wrote, "I watched the horde cross the Vistula on March 17, 1260. I had seen them enter Poland the previous year, proud, organized, invincible. The men who emerged were not the same. They moved like wounded animals, silent and broken. Many were missing limbs. Others were missing something less visible but more crucial, their spirits. The Mongols had entered Poland as conquerors. They left as survivors. And sometimes being a survivor is worse than being a casualty." Back in the Polish forests, Stanisław's hunters watched the last Mongols disappear across the river. They stood in silence, weapons lowered, too exhausted to celebrate. "We won," Kazimierz said. Nobody cheered. Nobody smiled. Stanisław just nodded once and said, "Yes, we won. Now we get to spend the rest of our lives remembering what we did to win." Father Wojciech pulled something from his pack, a small wooden cross that one of the dead Mongols had been carrying. Not a Christian cross, a Nestorian one. Evidence that even in the horde, there were believers. People with families, people with souls. "I'm keeping this," the priest said, "to remember that they were human too, that we didn't just kill monsters, we killed men. And that makes us survivors," Stanisław interrupted. "It makes us survivors. Don't dress it up with philosophy or guilt. We did what we had to do to protect our homes. Maybe that makes us monsters. Maybe that makes us heroes. Probably it makes us both. But mostly it just makes us done." He turned to walk away, then stopped. "Father, say a prayer. Not for us. For them. Because they came here believing they were invincible. and we taught them otherwise. That's a brutal lesson. And somewhere in the steppes, there are mothers who'll never see their sons again because of us. Should I feel guilty about that? I don't know. Ask God. Stanislav disappeared into the trees. I'm going home. But home wasn't waiting for any of them. The men who returned from the forests weren't the same men who'd left. Their wives saw it in their eyes, that 1,000-yard stare that sees through everything. Their children sensed it in their silences, the gaps where stories should be filled instead with dark memories they'd never share. Kazimierz's mother asked him once, "What did you do out there?" He looked at her with eyes far older than his 20 years. "We gardened, Mama, just gardened." She never asked again. Years later, on his deathbed, Stanislav would tell his grandson about the war. The boy, eager for tales of heroism, asked, "Were you brave, grandfather?" Stanislav thought for a long time. Then, "No, I was terrified every day, but I was more afraid of what would happen if I didn't fight. So I fought, and I won, and winning cost me something I'll never get back." "What did it cost you?" "The ability to sleep without seeing faces. The ability to eat meat without thinking about what meat really is. The ability to believe that there's a clear line between good people and bad people." He squeezed his grandson's hand. "Remember this, there are no heroes in war, just survivors and corpses. And sometimes the survivors envy the corpses." He died that night. In his left hand was a small carving, a wooden wolf he'd made during the campaign. In his right hand was a Mongol arrow he'd kept for 30 years. They buried him with both, because he'd spent his life as a shepherd and died as a wolf. And neither one alone could explain what he'd become. The Mongols never returned to Poland. The Golden Horde, once unstoppable, learned a lesson that would echo through history. You can conquer land, but you cannot conquer land that refuses to be conquered. You can break armies, but you cannot break people who'd rather burn everything than submit. Poland had won by being willing to destroy itself to save itself. It was a victory that tasted like ashes. It was a victory no one really wanted to celebrate. Because in the end, both sides lost something irreplaceable. The Mongols lost their legend of invincibility. The Poles lost their innocence. And the land, the poisoned, blood-soaked, haunted land, remembered everything. The first child born after the war was named Bolesław. His father, Kazimierz, the young hunter who'd once carved "Your turn to bleed" into a tree, held him in the spring of 1261 and wept. Not from joy. From relief that something innocent could still exist in a world that had taught him only darkness. "What's wrong?" his wife asked, seeing the tears. "Nothing's wrong." Kazimierz touched his son's tiny hand. "Everything's right. That's what's wrong. I don't know how to live in a world where things are right anymore." That disconnect between the men who'd fought and the peace they'd won would define Poland for a generation. The hunters came home, but home didn't recognize them. They looked like the men who'd left, but something fundamental had changed. They laughed less. They startled at sudden noises. They woke screaming from dreams they wouldn't describe. A Krakow physician named Master Andrzej, one of the first medieval doctors to study what we'd now call post-traumatic stress, wrote in 1263. "The soldiers of the Forest War exhibit a curious malady. Their bodies are whole, but their spirits remain in battle. They see enemies in shadows. They hear screams in silence. I have tried bleeding prayer and herbal remedies. Nothing works. Whatever they experienced in those woods, it lives inside them still. Perhaps some wounds cannot be healed. Perhaps some men pay for victory with their peace of mind, and that debt never expires." But while the survivors struggled with peace, something unexpected was happening across Europe. The story of how Poland defeated the Mongols was spreading. And with it, something else. Something that would reshape European consciousness for centuries. Hope. A Venetian merchant named Marco. Not the famous one, an earlier Marco arrived in Krakow in 1262 on a trade mission. He'd heard rumors of the Mongol defeat and wanted to know if they were true. In a tavern, he met an old soldier who'd been at Sandomierz. "Is it true what they say, that peasants defeated the Golden Horde?" the soldier missing 2 fingers and most of his teeth, looked at him. Defeated, no. We didn't defeat them. We just refused to lose. He took a long drink. There's a difference. I don't understand. You're a merchant. You understand supply and demand, yes. The soldier leaned forward. Well, the Mongols demanded submission. We supplied determination. They demanded our land. We supplied poison. They demanded our fear. We supplied rage. Eventually, they realized the cost of taking Poland was higher than the value of having it. So they left. That's not defeat. That's economics. Marco wrote about this conversation in a letter that survived in the Venetian archives. I came expecting tales of heroic battles and noble victories. Instead, I found something more disturbing and more inspiring: ordinary people who discovered that survival is not about being stronger than your enemy, but about being willing to pay a higher price than they are. The Poles did not beat the Mongols with superior tactics or divine intervention. They beat them with sheer, unbending refusal to stop existing. There is a lesson here for all of Christendom, though I'm not sure we're ready to learn it. But Europe was learning it. Within 5 years, the story had reached every corner of the continent. And everywhere it went, it changed something. The idea that the invincible could be defeated, that empires could be stopped, that ordinary people with nothing but determination and willingness to sacrifice everything could make even the greatest war machine decide it wasn't worth the cost. In 1265, a Bohemian duke named Ottokar, facing his own Mongol incursion, implemented Polish tactics: scorched earth, poisoned wells, night raids by civilians. The Mongols retreated after 3 weeks. In Hungary, in Lithuania, in the Balkans, everywhere, the Horde tried to expand. They met resistance that had learned from Poland. The Golden Horde's reputation, that aura of invincibility that had conquered half the world, was broken. Not by a great battle, but by a lesson that spread like wildfire: you don't have to win. You just have to make winning not worth it. But back in Poland, the men who taught that lesson were wrestling with what they'd become. In 1268, Stanislav gathered the surviving hunters at the site where they'd first trained. 37 men remained out of the original 200. Some had died in the forest. Others had died by their own hands after coming home. The rest looked at each other with the tired recognition of people who'd shared something too dark to explain. "Why did you call us here?" Bogdan, the blacksmith who'd stopped speaking during the war, had found his voice again. Sort of. It was quieter now, more careful. "To remember." Stanislav planted a wooden cross in the ground. Not to celebrate, not to mourn. Just to remember who we were before, who we became during, and who we're trying to be now. Father Wojciech, grayer and thinner, spoke up. "I've been thinking about what we did, trying to reconcile it with my faith, trying to understand if God would forgive us." "And?" Kazimierz asked. "And I've decided that's the wrong question." The priest looked around the circle. "God's forgiveness is infinite. The question isn't whether he forgives us. It's whether we forgive ourselves, and whether we should. Should we?" The question came from one of the younger hunters, a boy who'd lost his entire family at Legnica. Father Wojciech was quiet for a long time. "I don't know. We did terrible things for good reasons. We became monsters to fight monsters. We sacrificed our souls to save our people." He looked at the cross. "Maybe the point isn't forgiveness. Maybe the point is remembering, making sure we never forget the cost, making sure our children know that survival sometimes requires you to become something you hate, and making sure they also know," his voice cracked, "making sure they know it should never be easy. The moment it becomes easy to do terrible things even for good reasons, we've lost something we can't get back." Stanislav pulled something from his pack. A Mongol helmet, dented and bloodstained. "I kept this. Don't know why. Maybe as proof it really happened. Maybe as a reminder of what we're capable of when we're pushed far enough." He set it beside the cross. "I'm leaving it here, not as a trophy, as a warning, to us, to anyone who comes after. That war doesn't have winners, just survivors and ghosts. And sometimes, you can't tell which is which." One by one, the hunters added their own items: arrows, knives, pieces of Mongol armor. Each one a memory they wanted to leave behind, but couldn't quite let go. By the time they finished, the cross was surrounded by relics of a war that had no heroes, only people who'd done what they thought they had to do. "What do we tell our children?" Kazimierz asked. "When they ask what we did, what the war was like." "The truth," Stanisław said. "Stanisław. That we fought, that we won, that winning cost us everything worth having, and that they should never ever have to make the choices we made." But they couldn't tell the whole truth, because some truths are too heavy for children to carry. So they told simplified versions. Stories of brave defenders and evil invaders. Stories that left out the bone houses and the cannibalism and the nights spent poisoning wells while listening to men die slowly. They told stories that made them heroes, and every time they did, a little piece of them died inside. A Polish chronicler named Jan of Charnków, writing in 1280, captured this disconnect. The men of the Forest War are celebrated as saviors of Poland. Children sing songs about their bravery. But if you look closely at these men, you see something the songs miss. They don't smile at the praise. They don't enjoy the celebrations. They carry themselves like men under sentence of death, waiting for an execution that never comes. Perhaps the cruelest part of surviving war is being forced to live with what you did to survive it. In 1270, something unexpected happened. A Mongol envoy arrived in Krakow, requesting an audience with the Polish court. The diplomats were ready for demands for threats for renewed talk of invasion. Instead, the envoy bowed deeply and said, "The Golden Horde wishes to establish a trade agreement with Poland. We propose mutual borders, protected merchant routes, and a formal peace treaty." The Polish nobles were stunned. "You're asking for peace. We're acknowledging reality." The envoy's Polish was perfect. Too perfect. He'd clearly been preparing for this mission for years. Poland has proven that conquest is more expensive than cooperation. The Khan has decided that trading with you is more profitable than fighting you. One of the nobles leaned forward. "And if we refuse, then we trade with someone else and you miss an opportunity." The envoy smiled. "Your people taught us something valuable, that there are different kinds of strength. The strength to conquer is impressive, but the strength to make conquest not worth attempting. That's a power unto itself. The Khan respects that power. He wishes to negotiate with it, not against it." The treaty was signed 3 months later. The Golden Horde and Poland became trading partners. Former enemies exchanging goods across borders that had been painted with blood just a decade earlier. Noy Khan, who'd survived the retreat and been demoted to a provincial governor for his failure, heard about the treaty and laughed. Not with bitterness, with recognition. "We lost more than a battle in Poland," he told his successor. "We lost our certainty. For 2 generations, we believed we were unstoppable. Poland taught us we weren't, and once you lose that belief, you can never get it back. We're still the Golden Horde. We're still powerful, but we're no longer invincible." And that knowledge changes everything. A Chinese historian studying the Mongol expansion in the 13th century later wrote, "The retreat from Poland in 1260 marks a turning point in Mongol history, not because of casualties, they'd suffered worse losses before, but because it was the first campaign where they chose to leave rather than being forced out." That choice, that admission that some lands are not worth the cost of taking, represented a fundamental shift in Mongol psychology. The empire would continue for another century, but its expansion westward essentially stopped at the Vistula River. Poland had become a boundary, not of military might, but of will. And will, as it turns out, is harder to break than armies. Back in Poland, the survivors aged. Stanisław died in 1285, surrounded by grandchildren who knew him as a woodcarver, not a warrior. Kazimierz lived until 1292, spending his final years teaching young men how to hunt, but never ever why. Father Wojciech became a bishop famous for his sermons about mercy and the dangers of righteous violence. He never mentioned the war directly, but everyone knew what he was really talking about. The last surviving hunter, a man named Piotr, not the Chamberlain, a different Piotr, lived until 1310. By then, the war had become legend. Children played games reenacting battles that never quite happened the way the stories said. The darkness had been polished away, leaving only the shine of heroism. On his deathbed, a young priest asked Pyotr what it had really been like. "It was necessary," Pyotr said, his voice barely a whisper. "And it was unforgivable." And it was both of those things at the same time, every single day. We saved Poland by becoming something Poland shouldn't be proud of. That's the truth nobody wants to hear. That's the truth that will die with me. Should I write it down for history? Pyotr thought about it. Then, yes, write it down. Not so people can judge us, we're beyond judgment now. But so they understand that defending something precious sometimes requires you to do imprecious things. And that cost should never be forgotten. Because the moment we forget what war really costs, the moment we start believing in clean victories and noble battles, we're ready to do it all over again. The priest wrote it down. That testimony, preserved in a monastery outside Gdańsk, ends with a single sentence in Pyotr's own hand, shakier than the rest, but unmistakably his, "We won. God help us, we won." In 1315, a council of Polish nobles dedicated a monument. Not to the war, to the cost of the war. It was a simple stone inscribed with a list of villages that had burned themselves to stop the Mongols. 60 names each representing hundreds of people who'd chosen destruction over submission. At the dedication ceremony, the bishop, the former Father Wojciech, gave a speech that would be remembered for centuries. "We gather today not to celebrate victory, but to remember price." These villages, these people, they didn't defeat the Mongols with swords or arrows. They defeated them with sacrifice. They burned their homes, poisoned their wells, destroyed everything they'd built. They chose oblivion over occupation, and in that choice they taught the world something profound, that a people willing to lose everything are impossible to conquer. But let us not romanticize this. Let us not make it glorious. They didn't want to do what they did. They were forced to by an enemy that gave them no other option. So when we honor them today, we honor not their choice, but their courage. The courage to do what was necessary, even though it was terrible. The courage to become monsters, to fight monsters. And the courage, harder still, to live with that afterward. And he paused, his old eyes scanning the crowd. "I was there. I saw what we became. And I tell you now, never again. Never should any people be forced to make the choices we made. This monument stands not as inspiration, but as warning. War has no winners, only survivors, and survival is not the same as victory." The crowd was silent, because everyone there either remembered the war or had parents who did, and they all knew beneath the songs and stories and sanitized histories, they all knew what it had really been. Years later, a German monk traveling through Poland would write about visiting that monument. He noted something curious. The stone itself is unremarkable. Simple granite, simple inscription. But around it for decades, people have been leaving things. Arrows, knives, pieces of armor, small wooden carvings, letters written to the dead. It has become a place not of pride, but of confession. A place where the survivors come to admit what they did, and the generations after come to understand what it cost. I have never seen a war memorial quite like it. Most celebrate triumph. This one mourns necessity. That monument still stands today, in a field outside Krakow. And people still leave things there, still write names, still try to process what their ancestors had to become to survive. Because that's the legacy of the Polish-Mongol War of 1259 to 1260. Not that the invincible can be defeated, though they can. Not that peasants can beat professional soldiers, though they did. But that survival sometimes requires you to sacrifice the very things that make survival worth it. That defending your humanity sometimes means temporarily abandoning it. That the price of freedom can be paid in pieces of your soul, and some debts never fully clear. The Mongols came to Poland expecting another conquest. Instead, they found a land that would rather die than kneel. And when a land makes that choice, when an entire people decide that submission is worse than annihilation, even the greatest empire in history has to stop and recalculate. They taught Europe to fear them. Europe taught them something more valuable, that fear, when pushed far enough, transforms into something fiercer, something patient, something that waits in darkness, with a sharpened blade and absolutely nothing left to lose. The Golden Horde would never seriously threaten Europe again, not because they couldn't, but because Poland had proven that conquest has a price, and sometimes that price is too high even for emperors. Stanisław's wooden wolf and Mongol arrow, buried with him in 1285, were discovered during excavations in 1867. They're now in a museum in Warsaw, displayed with a simple placard, Farmer, Hunter, Survivor, 1230-1285. He did what he had to do. May we never have to do the same. That's perhaps the truest epitaph for everyone who fought in that war, on both sides. They did what they had to do. They became what they had to become. They paid what they had to pay. And the land that poisoned, blood-soaked, haunted land remembered everything. Still does. Still will. Because some stories aren't meant to inspire. They're meant to warn. And this story's warning is simple. Victory is possible. Even against impossible odds, even with no resources. Even when you're outmatched in every measurable way, victory is possible. But it will cost you. It will cost you things you didn't know could be spent. It will cost you pieces of yourself that never grow back. It will cost you the ability to sleep peacefully, to eat without thinking of the starving, to live without seeing ghosts. And maybe, just maybe, that cost is worth it when the alternative is extinction. But don't ever mistake necessary for good. Don't ever mistake survival for triumph. The Poles survived. Europe survived. But something was lost in those forests and mountains that can never be recovered. Some innocence. Some faith in easy answers. Some belief that there are clean ways to fight dirty wars. What was gained? Time. Space. The ability to raise children who didn't have to learn what their parents learned. The chance to rebuild. To live. To hope. Is that worth the cost? Ask the survivors. They'll tell you yes, while their eyes tell you no. Because the truth is both. Always both. Forever both. That's the real lesson of how Europe destroyed the invincible Mongols. Not that they could be beaten, but that beating them required becoming something that shouldn't exist. Something that won by being willing to lose everything. Something that defended humanity by temporarily abandoning it. We won, Piotr wrote. God help us, we won. And in those 6 words lies everything you need to know about war victory and the price we pay for both. If you believe this story, these names, these sacrifices, these terrible necessary choices should be remembered. Share it. Write a name in the comments. Someone from your own history who did what had to be done and paid the price for doing it. Because the only thing worse than remembering this cost would be forgetting it and doing it all over again.